live.
Hi, everyone. My name is Caroline Muldowney, and I am president of the Texas A&M University School of Law chapter of the Federalist Society. Thank you all for joining us for this week's installment of the Practice Group Study Break series, PG-15. The Federalist Society practice groups are organized into areas of practice group is led by a committee comprised of top lawyers from across the country. They meet publications and the panels for the Federalist Society. You can learn more about the practice groups at fedsoc.org/practice groups. Tonight, I'm happy to welcome an executive committee member of the Corporation's Securities and Antitrust Practice Group, James Lloyd. James is Associate Deputy Attorney General for Civil Litigation and Chief of the Antitrust Division in the Office of the Texas Attorney General. He leads the enforcement of state and federal antitrust laws and represents the interests of Texas in national antitrust matters. He previously practiced at Sidley Austin and Mayer Brown and was a law clerk at the Texas Supreme Court. He has also served at the White House, coordinating policymaking and oversight with senior officials among the cabinet departments and agencies. In addition to his legal practice, James is an intelligence officer in the U.S. Navy Reserve, assigned to the commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. James has a bachelor's degree from Rice University and earned his law degree at the University of Texas. Thank you for joining us for this conversation, James.
Thank you. Really glad to be here. I think we're excited. I come with as an emissary of the practice groups because in our conversations as the leaders, we said, how can we be as useful as we can to students across the nation or recent graduates? And we said, what better way than to link up some of the knowledge we have about how we got into our careers and what we do and bring that to y'all. So really for us, it's about being as helpful and as useful as we can to help y'all succeed in your career.
Well, really appreciate that. Glad that you're joining us tonight. The tagline for this series is 30 minutes, your questions, their answers. And so true to that spirit, we're going to structure our time around questions and answers. This is also an opportunity for our audience members to ask questions. So I would encourage you guys to do so through the Q&A function on Zoom. James, I think we should start first with your background, maybe touch on some antitrust basics, and we can spend some time discussing the practice group and then end with questions from the audience.
Okay.
So would you walk us through the early days of your legal career, your decision to apply to law school, and maybe some of the key decisions you made early on that started you on your track to big law, maybe some time in DC, and then now the Texas Attorney General's office?
Yeah, so even coming out of undergrad at Rice, I had worked in DC and I started kind of getting that bug of both the political and the policy side. So I knew that was kind of in the back of my head. And I will tell you, having both parents who are lawyers means they both suggested I become a doctor, as is par for the course, but I resisted and I ended up doing what I really felt like I wanted to do and had a really strong interest in. And that's what put me on the path toward law school and stayed on that path after spending some time in DC. When I got to law school, I think one of the journeys that we all have to go through is to figure out what we want to specialize in, what we want to practice. Now, I think from that, you have really two big ones up front. You have transactional versus litigation. So that's one that comes up. Within that, there's going to be a lot of other subcomponents. Within transactional, you have like an M&A practice, you'll have a securities practice, you'll have different areas. Within litigation, you can explore different components of litigation. So one of them that I always thought was very interesting is sort of a government enforcement practice, where we merge that policy side with the litigation side. And that's where I started getting interested in antitrust law. And for a while, I had an interest in transactional work too. So I got the chance to work on transactional work in practice. And frankly, it turned out to be really helpful because even when at one point you start to see kind of where the rubber meets the road on deal delays, on problems you have, you start to understand the realm of the challenges that you face when you have government enforcement. So that's always really helped me. So in other words, the more perspectives you get throughout your career, the better. And I will say, starting with your 1L summer, you have to decide, where can I go there? I think there's really great opportunities in courts. You can become an intern to a judge, a law clerk. That's where it begins. You get to explore. And I would really encourage people throughout the process that really helped me is to do internships. Do internships if you're nearby your office. I did one with the governor's office here in Texas during a spring semester. So that worked out great. I got to see what that was about and really kind of figure out what I'm interested in. Because it is tough because a lot of times you're really targeting to what the law firms have available. But I would really encourage folks to understand there's a lot more that you can control than you think. And I think we'll hit on that later on as we talk about how people can choose a path toward antitrust enforcement.
Absolutely. That's something that I am really starting to realize the value of kind of towards the end of law school is just what it can do for your clarity with direction. If you expose yourself to lots of different opportunities in law school through internships and things like that. So that's great advice. So I think we'll move over to antitrust law specifically now. And quite candidly, I know, James, we've discussed this. I'm not super familiar with antitrust law, and I'm sure some of our audience members are not yet either. But I do understand that it generally focuses on statutes and regulations that promote fair and open competition within different industries and geographic markets. Can you maybe give a little more to that understanding for my benefit and for the audience as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And for everybody's benefit, there's a certain degree of kind of intimidation with the antitrust. It's always been sort of like you must know the secret passwords and the codes to get into the area of practice. But in reality, when you start to see what we do, it's so fascinating. It's so interesting across industries that you can pick it up. I'll tell you, even in our world, we've had people move from being prosecutors to being an antitrust enforcement. We've had people move from other areas of litigation, and they say, hey, I got these litigation skill sets. Can I apply them with this particular area? I have an interest in what y'all do. And we said, yes. The baseline is knowing how litigation works. For example, if you've clerked or worked at even just a small shop doing litigation, the fact that you know the groundwork is so valuable. But to provide a little bit of a background on antitrust law, I think it's you don't have to worry. You can get up to speed. We can get you up to speed, even if you haven't taken a class. That's a good place to start, but you can learn on your own. And frankly, one of the missions of antitrust has always been to try to get people to understand what we do, because it's really an important component of what the government does, and it's relevant to a lot of people's lives. And so for us to give you just a little bit of a tidbit, just so everybody can get caught up, antitrust laws, we protect competition and consumers. So we ensure free markets, open markets, because we believe that when you have healthy competition, we believe consumers will benefit through lower prices, more choices, higher products and services, and greater innovation. So for us, a lot of times too, you might see us bring an enforcement action against a large company. A lot of times that's actually because we're bringing it on behalf of a lot of consumers who are impacted, and frankly, a lot of small and mid-sized businesses who are trying to make it and succeed as well. So I think there's a certain cleanup function in there that try to keep our free markets as tidy as we can. Now, antitrust enforcement has a long history in the US, which can surprise people unless you remember that component of your Con Law 1 class with trust busting. For us, the three main antitrust laws in the US are three pieces of legislation: the Sherman Act, the Federal Trade Commission Act, and the Clayton Act. States have also their own laws, and they actually, in some instances, predate the Sherman Act. So 13 states before the Sherman Act was enacted had laws to prohibit monopolies, trusts, and really other devices where you could fix prices. And that goes back to the start of almost every industry we've seen. Those laws from the states were enacted in about the 1880s. So the laws really focus on the antitrust pieces is laws to prevent an abuse of dominance, bid rigging, price fixing, and customer allocation. We also review mergers. So both the states and the feds have the Hart-Scott-Rodino Act, so that if a merger gets to a certain level, you have to report it to them. And if the antitrust enforcers see concerns in that area, they can then bring it to court to challenge the merger. There's also a misconception sometimes they have to clear the merger, but the clearance really does rely on the enforcers challenging it. not so much the clearance component. And a good example there for example, in Texas, one of the big areas we're focused on is procurement collusion. So that's where you rig a bid. So let's say we want to have a really open process to bid on an extremely expensive highway contract or a big, huge government contract. The last thing we want is the 4 bidders to get together and say, well, I'm going to raise my price to this level in this bid. So y'all just kind of put on fake bids. And then on this next bid, you can get this one. So we'll make sure not to undercut ourselves so that a third party can win at a lower price. So that's what we really enforce. And that takes a lot of investigations to get to that. So that's an example of really enforcing conduct. And to frame for everybody where you can go in your careers, there's federal enforcers and state antitrust enforcers. On the federal side, you have the DOJ and the Antitrust Division of the Department of Justice. And then you have the Federal Trade Commission. Now, remember, the Federal Trade Commission also handles a lot of consumer actions as well in the consumer protection space. So that's also kind of a fascinating angle. And it's one that a lot of the antitrust folks have to say sometimes, hey, we might not have this ability to tackle this issue, but the consumer protection side can with us. And so that also leaves it, that's the federal side, but then the state side, almost every AG's office has an antitrust practice. Whether they have a devoted staff member to that is sometimes waivers, but some of the large states like Texas, New York, Florida, California will have very large shops devoted to antitrust enforcement. It's also important to remember there's international enforcement. So there's international bodies, and those are popping up a lot more now, and their activism levels getting high, which is a complication for American businesses now that there's a lot more eyes on our companies throughout the world. And so that's kind of the groundwork for antitrust. I will flag one area just because it is relevant to how you think about it. There's still a great debate that you'll hear about is why, what's the controversial part of antitrust? And some of that is how far it should extend. So we do think that there is a right way to do antitrust. It's not just about going after things because they're big. You might hear about our, going after monopolies, but being a monopoly isn't illegal. It's what happens if you use the power that you get from that monopoly to harm your competitors or to charge unfair prices or to hurt consumers. So you have to see that consumer harm, and that has to be part of the analysis. So part of that is why we have a heavy component of economic analysis to help guide, put something objective in this process to help guide our analysis in these cases and to help the judges do it. Because remember, a lot of antitrust enforcement is really guided by fact-specific analysis of the courts. And for a lot of people, I think who will understand on our call, that can actually be at times a conservative approach, because we say it's a conservative approach for us to get into some of these industries and to clean out some of the anti-competitive concerns we have, rather than a sort of sledgehammer approach of regulation. So this works through a sort of more of a tailored approach through the courts. So for a lot of people on the call that would be on this program, I think that'd be an interesting take of how we see things differently. So that's kind of the big overview of antitrust. I think we can even get into some more as we go through how you choose your career in it.
Yes, I was actually thinking, you've mentioned, the feds and the state level. Now there's a private sector piece of this as well. And I believe that you have experience in both the public and private sector. So if you want to speak a little bit about your experience there, what the differences are, and maybe why you chose to make the switch.
Exactly. And so there's also private enforcers. So the slate of laws the state and federal enforcers have, we represent consumers, or at times we can represent, the agencies itself in terms of their merger reviews. But there's also an entire spectrum of plaintiff side cases that are brought by most of the major law firms have these practice areas, and anyone can bring these cases. Frankly, if you have, if there was a 3 stores in a city and one of them is doing is bid rigging, then you could see an entire practice in a small town if we can see that. And that's actually one thing where we remind the state practices is that we're responsible at a lower level, at a micro level, to make sure that some of our cities and small communities still have policing of anti-competitive practices. So I think, but and that's where the dynamic about determining where you want to go with your career is. You can start in the private sector side, learn those experiences, work at a firm, and get a lot of those experiences, and then say, hey, I want either a different balance of work life. I want to work as an enforcer. I want to go after these cases. I want to be able to prosecute more. I want to be able to represent the state. That's where some people decide to move over about their, you could do 3 years, you could do 6 years, you could do 20 years. And you can start at the private sector side and really get a good experience. And I'll actually say to people, just to kind of put away in your head, there's a world in which you can start on the private sector side, even in litigation or some other area, some broader litigation, let's just say just general civil litigation, and just say, hey, I really have an interest in these antitrust practice area. I want to try one out. So you can go to your firm leader and you can say, I want to be on an antitrust case. Don't be afraid to ask that. Don't be afraid to express an interest in that. That's exactly what they want to see, is that you have an interest in it, and maybe you can specialize in it as you do more. If you do really well in one and you impress a partner, they might say, hey, you're currently listed as an antitrust person, a government investigations person, and a general like civil litigation practice. They can say, but man, you're like hitting it out of the park with your antitrust work. Maybe that's something you have an interest in. So you could end up with an entire career only on the private sector side. And it's tremendous. I mean, the corporations you'll get to represent and stand up in court and represent are some of the largest players in world industries, and you're defending against, and in some cases you're helping tell the court, hey, I don't think this enforcement action is appropriate. I think this is too far. I don't think your economic analysis is right. I really don't think you even understand our market. You don't understand that these cases, like this case, could really, really help consumers if you let us do this specific act. And I think that's where there's a really fascinating side on the defense component, both on the plaintiff side and defense side on the private sector, because really it's about self-regulating a lot of these markets. And that's really done by the players in the market. That's a lot more of those cases you'll see. And that's where, as you hear about antitrust law, you'll hear about the big cases that the enforcers bring, but a lot of the real nuance in the work is really happening on the private sector side with business to business. And I think that's a really great question to ask too, because it's one you have to ask kind of early on.
Absolutely. Now that we have sort of a fuller view of the opportunities that exist within antitrust, can you maybe suggest things that current law students can do to set themselves up for an opportunity practicing antitrust law, maybe specific classes that you would recommend? Like, I know you said that, there's not anything that's necessarily required, but maybe that would be good to look at, as well as internships or other resources.
Yeah, the first place to start is to really understand the wealth of information that's out there on the internet for you to take advantage of these days. If you want to learn about any component of a practice area, there's so much on YouTube, on the web that you can look up. You could just pop in a 30-minute panel and listen to that panel. You can learn a lot now. There's so much on the web for you to learn about that. So that's a first step, is just, if you really have an interest, go on YouTube and antitrust basics, antitrust panel. There's plenty FEDSOC panels and programs that you can come up and plug into. In terms of beyond that, once you kind of get a sense of what you're interested in, internships, like I said, are really good. Your 1L summer, your 2L summer, you can split summers. We're always looking for great people. And I think one of the things I really encourage there is reach out to people. If you see somebody in the public sector, don't be afraid to reach out, because we're always eager to get as many people as we can into public service. Like we hate saying no if we've already filled a spot. We really don't like it. We're honored that people want to do public service. We do understand that there is the pay might not be as strong as in the private sector side, but we understand that there's a trade-off. And for that, I think that really means a lot. So reach out to enforcers, reach out to people who are practicing in this area. There's nothing more than reaching out to particularly somebody who's an alum of your university. Find them in a university directory. You can find them. You can go to your career services people and say, hey, I really have an interest in this area. Just shoot them an email. All of our emails are usually online. You can find us on LinkedIn. We love to help law students and young professionals find a meaningful practice in law, because we know it's already hard enough as it is. Like, this is not the easiest path you can pick in life. So I think from that, you can use your 1L summer to get some experience at the federal enforcers, at the state enforcers. I will say the spring and summers are less competitive. It's pretty kind of a little secret. Those are better ways in DC. If you don't get an offer on the summer, you can say, hey, I'd really like to come for the spring or the fall. I'd like to try to see if I can work remotely, all the things you want to explore. So that's as you work your way through. Now, once you get your 2L or your 3L a year, you can take those antitrust classes. That's not the be all end all. If you don't take them, you can go practice your litigation. You could explain that to your law firms. So I think there's plenty of room in there where even if you don't take those, but if you really do have an interest, the classes are great. Then you take the advanced classes and you really start to develop that relationship with your professor to say, this is your real passion. I think within there, I'll also flag real fast. You can get involved in FEDSOC programs, find the people who are involved at the, at the conventions and ask your leaders how you can connect with mentors. We have plenty in the Texas side. I know all the other states do too, who can connect you. Send it up the chain through to the student practice group. Say, I really want to get in touch with somebody where we really want to help you. I know people at the law firms do too, because they're recruiting. They want great people. So you're actually not ever bugging people, but really reaching out is helpful. And then if you really do develop those interests, there's also state bar sections, which have antitrust groups. You can go to the lunches and learn about them, sign up. You can go to the ABA this next week. There's an entire week, effectively, of antitrust week, they call it, in the Capitol, where I think like 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 people come and just do antitrust panels for 30 times over panels each day. And you could just go and meet anybody you want in that room. And there's student liaisons to that chapter. There's student liaisons to our own practice group here at FEDSOC.
I'm so glad you brought FEDSOC up, because this is kind of where I wanted to go next. FEDSOC is such an incredible resource for law students, and I think in a lot of ways is underutilized. And like you said, there's so many just accomplished attorneys who are willing to help law students and kind of show them the ropes. So I understand that you were a member of FEDSOC in law school. Can you talk a little bit about why you chose to remain active in the society after graduating?
Yeah, for me, and one of the parts about the legal practice is I kind of always have been the person who likes to sort of extracurricular activities. Like when you were in school, it wasn't just the classes for me. It's the law review is really where I got to know a lot of people and find those meaningful relationships. And I really try to seek those out. And I think when you start to practice and while you're in law school, start to find your community. And for me, I really looked at a lot of different groups, and I went into a lot of different conferences to try to find the right niche where I could find people who, had similar interests to me, who kind of thought about legal problems the way I'd like to think of legal problems and who I'd want to learn from. And I found that FEDSOC really did deliver that for me. I go, and I will say it's hard at first because you're like, do I spend that money to go to, this is thinking if you're a national chapter member, if you go to national as a lawyers chapter member, say, is it worth the money to like, because it really isn't a cost. It's about $1,000 or so after all your travel expenses. And at first I was like, I don't know, should I not? Literally that first year, you walk in there, you start to see fascinating topics. And even then, if you don't necessarily meet every single person you need to meet, I met somebody at my first conference that 8 years later, somebody said, I need to introduce you to this guy because it's going to be, I've never introduced you to somebody. And he goes, here's the person's name. He's at this top finance firm. And I went, oh, I had dinner with him at a conference. And we spent an hour together. I just remembered his name and his firm. And so it all begins there. And I wouldn't take it for granted too, because over time you build those relationships, you see the people over and over again. And after about 8 years, you really built a community of people who you can work with and can seek help and relationships in, because it's not easy out there to find community, particularly after pandemic, where a lot of programs went away. The bar sections aren't as active, because I was always very active in the local bar. And it's been a challenge because a lot of us haven't come back, but our programs have all come back in full force. And there's literally something for any interest area you have.
It's funny you bring up National Lawyers Convention. I went to my first one this year as a student volunteer and went through a similar cost benefit analysis just with the time and all that. And it was outstanding. It was certainly something that I don't plan to miss in the future. So I'm glad that you brought that up. Can you, we'll do one more question and then we have a couple of audience questions. But can you talk about how your involvement with the practice group has enhanced your legal career?
Yeah, and I think it really is about building community so that you don't see, like, if you're just practicing law and you have the couple people down the hallway from you. And for me, I really like to engage with people in the practice of law. I like to talk about these issues that I think are important and relevant, particularly if you're in an area like antitrust, where we really do have to get together and say, in my world, we work a lot on trying to find if there is a bipartisan agreement, where is it? Where's the right, how, like we said earlier, how far should antitrust go? What's the right answer? And this is a place where you can be a part of those conversations and really help drive that meaningful dialogue. And I think that's where FEDSOC has always been really meaningful in having different perspectives. Even on some panels, you might see, well, isn't that all the conservative perspective? And I said, whoa, an antitrust or conservative perspective is wide right now. So even within that, I had to figure out, like, what is the conservative approach here? And then even on some of our best panels, we had ACLU members who were on a panel, and literally we started to realize in one area is like, oh, this is a sort of an agreement in this area. Oh, this is where we really disagree. And I think that was really fascinating at one of our conferences. And it was really powerful to see those perspectives and to understand, the real debate. I will also say, how did I got to be on the board of the Federalist Society Houston chapter with extraordinary people. And I was so honored to be able to be on that board. And I'll tell you a little tidbit about how I got a hook. I said, I'll help with anything you need. I said, how can I help? I'll sign up people. I'll plan events. I'll plan the happy hour. And sure enough, when a lot of people are really busy and you're the person who is willing to put in a little bit of sweat equity into it, you'll get noticed. And any organization you're in, be the one that wants to take up the mantle, do something, help people, offer your services that really you may even have. Like, I'm pretty good at putting things together and helping organize, even host our annual dinner each year. And it's helpful to say, hey, I'm okay with planning a 90-person sit-down event. I don't mind doing it. That's what I can help provide to our group. And sure enough, it provided a lot of value. And in one instance, I helped set up our Facebook page. That was a skill that I could contribute. So find a way to contribute. This is for any organization you're in. And I think that you'll take off if you do that.
Absolutely. It demonstrates just a next level of buy-in, I think. That can really take you far.
Yeah, and you got to go. It's like you got to show up. So like when they have those lunch meetings, go. It's not going to be once a year where you're going to make that relationship with a partner who may want to hire you, because be like, I've seen this guy all the time. And literally in one instance, when I decided to move move firms, it was just a matter of just a passing conversation at lunch about an interest in this area that they were handling. And that's where I think there's a lot of value. But it doesn't come by just popping in and out or not staying the extra 30 minutes at the end or coming 30 minutes early and getting a chance to talk with people. Really devote that time and enjoy it too. Just have fun with people, because a lot of times and don't be intimidated too either. Like, always come to these events. No one is ever going to say, oh, there's a law student over here. And somebody's a judge. The judges love to see the law students. That's like their favorite people, because they're actually the people who are most genuinely interested in learning about the law. And so don't feel intimidated by the people. Don't feel intimidated by practice groups. We're all really excited and eager to have new people.
Well, that's great advice, James. Thank you. We have a couple of audience questions. We're about out of time here, but I do want to try to get to one. So if you can address this one maybe relatively quickly. The question says, do you have any thoughts on the proposed merger between JetBlue and Spirit Airlines, or antitrust enforcement in the aviation industry in general?
Yeah, and see, that really points to a great component of our practice in the States is we look at these deals as how they impact Texas. So for my role, I have to look at that, and I go and we talk with local participants in our area, and we see how is it going to impact, how are the routes, how are the city pairs going to impact Texas. So we assign a team. Now that team might have been doing something entirely different at the state level. Now FTC, they have a little bit more focus on aviation. We don't see a lot of aviation. But I think as that's an active investigation, it's probably easier to not get into the weeds of how it does impact Texas, but that really is what will guide us. And in this case, I think we work with a lot of times our federal enforcers. So they'll come to us and say, hey, what is your thoughts on how it impacts Texas? And that really is kind of our role. I think my actual thoughts on that one are, because it's still an active one, that, you know, we always are reviewing. I think I'll say just how we look at it.
Awesome. Well, we are officially out of time. So thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you to the Federalist Society for putting this event together. And a big thank you to James for sharing your time and your expertise with us. It's been really great talking with you. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Caroline. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Before we break, I'd like to plug next week's PG-15 installment titled Race Preferences Go to the Supreme Court, which will be hosted by the University of Michigan Law School FEDSOC chapter. You won't want to miss it. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and have a great night.